how we display it and how that entire infrastructure works.
Leo?
Yeah.
I might not have actually hit the final go button on the live stream.
Yeah, I thought so as well.
So that's on me. Would you mind? No one heard anything we just said. So skip the part where I do the intro and just skip over to you.
Sure. Hey, hello, I'm Leo. I am a software engineer at Deno. I mainly work on the CLI itself and also web properties and DX. In that regard, mainly the documentation. And that's going to be today's topic from me. So how we generate documentation, how we display it, and that entire infrastructure behind it. So let's see if I can share my presentation. Nice, there we go. So yeah, what is DX? Let's begin with the basics. People think DX is mostly about the API itself, how we use a CLI, but it's more than that. DX includes how to find modules or packages that you want to use. Let's say for a repository like npm, for example, how you navigate that, how you find an npm package, how do you find documentation for it? Just everything around the ecosystem that regards to finding and using it as a whole, including like documentation of the tool itself, like the manual. Yeah, searching modules and documentation. This is how our website looks, rather our old third-party registry for Deno. And yeah, other topics that also include the access, also the LSP and warnings/messages, and being successful, like for module developers to be successful with modules. So getting the modules out, getting an audience for the modules, getting contributions, just all around that, being able just to publish things, get them out into the world and have people use them. Yeah, the experience for our module registry, which we often just shorthand call it /x or /x/, is not that great. We have over 1,000 modules, around 5,000 plus by now. We didn't have that great of bounce rate. People were just constantly bouncing off. People were not staying on pages, only 1.1 page per session. That's not great. We want people to stay long on the pages, explore more around, find what they actually want, not just instantly give up. The module search ranking also was a bit of a problem. Modules were ranked based on GitHub stars, which is just not a great metric. It's just a vanity number in the end. We need to document them and list them in order of actual popularity, usage, quality, and all of various factors. And for developers, rather module developers, it's hard to gain confidence, rather for users in general, hard to gain confidence about the module system as a whole. If people cannot find the modules they want, then why would they even stick with a project or use that specific piece of software? Our modules ecosystem is tiny compared to npm of the likes, which has millions, beyond millions of modules. We only have a fraction of that. So the module ecosystem itself is a huge contributor to allowing new Deno developers to successfully build and achieve their goals using Deno as a whole. So without modules, as I stated before, is that people are just going to give up quickly. So a lot of drop happens because new Deno users just can't locate what they want and just think it's not a valid piece of software to use because it's just not used enough, or rather there's not enough modules for people to use and build applications. So we decided to go down the path of increasing the quality of our documentation. We generate documentation lazily upon request, cache and store in a database, and use Deno doc route scripts for generating docs. I will go in depth into these 3 points. As a main tool for people to write documentations, we have decided to use JSDoc and TSDoc, a bit of a combination of both. We mainly follow the TSDoc standard, which has more tight-knit with TypeScript itself, but we do also copy some features that are lacking from it from JSDoc, as TSDoc is not exactly being in fast development, and JSDoc just has more capabilities. So yeah, let's start with our main tool, the Deno_doc, which is a tool we've made which takes in a module, a path to a file, and returns a large JSON structure, which we call doc nodes. Basically, it just takes all the JS docs or TS docs and outputs them, parses them, outputs them, and gives us a clean JSON structure on how to, clean JSON structure that you can use then to display or search through. Yeah, so the whole setup, how it works, our infrastructure is when someone creates a new module or package, how people from the NPM ecosystem might more know, to our registry, the path pretty much is the user uploads a new module to the registry, and the API server then behind the scenes generates some metadata, including directory structure of the project, version, Git repository, when it was uploaded, and some minor extra metadata that the registry can use then to give more insights and better results. The metadata is then cached on S3, specifically the directory structure and the version. This is still from an old system of ours. We're trying to move everything to now Google Data Store, which is our improved system that we use for where we have most of the data now, most of the metadata, all the JSDoc transformation to these doc nodes is then stored on Google Data Store. And after that whole thing happens, we upload to Algolia, which we use for our search results on our website. So we upload the name, the description, the popularity score, which is a score that we measure using Google Analytics to see how popular specific modules are. And then whether the module is a third-party module or our own module, like we have a built-in, well, not built-in, but by us provided standard library, which includes a various set of utilities and functionalities. And however, it's a standard library that's considered special, or I mean, it's from us and we have given it special treatment, let's put it like that. So when one goes on a third-party section of the website, we only want to show them third-party modules, not the standard library, which can be easily accessed from a tab on our website. So we filter that out, so people just get what they actually are searching for. Yeah, so when a user goes to Land/O, for example, /oaks is similar to Koa from NPM, which is a similar web framework to Express. So pretty much it's the equivalent of Express in the Deno ecosystem. And the process behind it is that the server checks if the data store has the doc nodes generated for this module. If not, it attempts to use DenoDoc as a WASM library because it's written completely in Rust, because we also use Deno doc in the Deno CLI itself, and then generate these doc nodes and save them to Google Data Store. And if this does fail for any reason, because we do run this on Deno deploy, this gets sent to a queue, and then we have a cron job that goes through the queue in case that it goes above the Deno deploy 50 milliseconds compute time. And then we render these doc nodes through our UI component system that we call doc components, which can be seen here on the right. It's just various React components that take doc nodes, these doc node structs, and just renders them to be more user-friendly and better for users to grab through and get at the documentation that they want to. Yeah, so the before and after. As you can see, it's not that great before. Before we were only showing code. Just wait, let's see if I can. Yes. Before we were only showing code. This is our old system, very old website that we were using, and we were only showing code, not giving any good information. We were showing when it was released and the GitHub stars, and that's pretty much it. A link to the version on CDN and to GitHub itself. But then with our new system, we start generating documentation based on TS-doc and JS-doc. So we show an import, we show the actual documentation that could be seen over here. This is all rendered nicely with as Markdown. We have some links and an example on how in this specific set of utilities, how to get what you want. Then we separate under different categories like classes, functions, type aliases, interfaces, and show the name of the symbol that one wants to use, and right next to it a short description of what it is. And this is all automatically generated via these JS-doc and TS-doc component comments. So this massively increased the usage of our registry. The bounce rate decreased. People kept staying on the pages. People go around the pages more. They go through, find what they want, and hopefully manage to get the results that they hope for. We also have a few search metrics that now we are able to get at through the usage of Algolia, which shows us what people are looking for and how likely people are to find what they want. We have a click-through rate here that we can see that is pretty decent. So people are finding most of the things they want. They're finding Oak, they're finding various projects that they want, but we also do see that some searches are not as populated or a click-through as we would hope for. So that indicates to us that we have to hope to make modules for people that are rather give better results to people for the modules that they want, or try to find someone that is willing to work on implementing such a module. For example, this is what our search looks like. We have a landing search. We show the manual, which is like the Rust manual, if you're familiar with that. It's an extensive manual on the usage and subcommands and various parts of the ecosystem, how it works and what to do. And then we have individual searches. And then here we have a default set of results, as mainly STD, since that is our main tool set that people tend to gravitate through and get what they want to. And then you can search for Oak, and you will get all the results for Oak and any similar related modules to Oak with multiple pages of results. So what do we have planned next for our system? One idea would be that we would love to lazily generate documentation for NPM modules and be able to display that, since, in my opinion, the NPM documentation ecosystem, let's put it like that, is lacking. Everyone documents in their own way, uses a third party, so it's like DocuSource or TypeDoc or whatever else there is. This is not great. Everyone is doing their own thing, and there's not an easy way for people to just search the package they want and get to finding what they want to use and do. Then we want a local symbol search. What this means, if you are in a specific module on the website, you can search for all symbols across that module. We used to have a global symbol search. So there was another tab here that had symbols where you could search for all the symbols throughout the entire ecosystem, similar to what Go does. However, that deemed to be difficult and a bit unfeasible for us to keep maintaining, even automated. So a local symbol search would be more effective, and this probably would be client-side instead of using Algolia. Then resolving import maps. For those that are not familiar with import maps, it's a standard web way to define dependencies and mapping them to custom specifiers. And the idea is, since they're not composable currently, it's that the registry detects these import maps and resolves any specifiers in imports to resolve the entry with the import map. So we kind of make them composable through the registry system itself. Then a scoring algorithm, in case currently our metric system is not great for modules. We currently only base it on popularity from Google Analytics. However, that is not enough. We want to rate based on the quality of the module, if it uses the formatter, if it passes linting, if it has high level of contribution to it, and many various other factors that hopefully would highlight more the modules that actually get actively worked on compared to modules that are lower quality, not maintained properly, outdated, don't work with the latest versions of the CLI, and so forth. And tagging modules to help with search. With tagging, I mean like, let's say categories. There we go. That's the best example. We would love to have categories for our system, so people can just filter through all HTTP frameworks or web frameworks or modules to go to communicate with AWS, for example, just various different tags, and having the ability for people to go through that, and probably would use, since our registry purely works currently with GitHub, we would just reuse GitHub's topics and just proxy that through and use that to search. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. And yeah, I'm Leo. You can find me on GitHub there. You can find Deno on our Twitter, our YouTube, and on our Discord, where most of the responses will happen through. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leo. That was great. Let me just real quick. So next, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to plus one with everything you said, Leo. I was going through NPM the other day looking for like alternatives, just like modules I use all the time, like Execa or something like that. Like, is there anything else out there that's, I don't know, newer, like smaller? I have to compile like all that information myself based on like trying to analyze bundle size or something. So the pain is definitely there and felt, especially in the NPM ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we will manage to document all these NPM modules in a reliable and realistic way. I mean, it still would require for people to then put JSDoc and TSDoc comments, which looking through NPM, not many people really do. So it's gonna be tough, but hopefully we'll be able to make the whole ecosystem much better.
Leo, do you have any more insights for us on how you're using search to determine feature and roadmap? I think that's right. Like, it's obvious, we know that, but we're going through a lot of that prioritization ourselves. Like, what do users want? And
yeah,
this may have been a conversation we had just yesterday. And I'm like, oh yeah, search, but there seems to be so much noise with search. I don't know what to trust sometimes, right? Like, it feels like if I really want to look into that, I've got a deep dive. But just any insights, things that you've tried or learned recently that might be helpful to cut to the chase on what can I learn from what users are searching for?
Yeah, it's a difficulty we also encounter. We have quite a lot of results, but luckily people gravitate in our system more to specific results and searching for more a group of things rather than exactly specific things, which luckily helps us find and hopefully get down to the crux that people want to have, of what people want to have. But yeah, it's a problem for us as well. We get a lot of results and we have to grab through that and figure out, do people actually want this or not?
Yeah, maybe a better question is, have you found any tricks to validate those, maybe discoveries? So, all right.
Not really.
Okay, well, if we find some, we'll let you know, and vice versa. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do.
The only question so far from the YouTube live stream was, wait, so we can use Redwood with Deno now? Which honestly, from the day Deno went public, like, that was like, hey, it's available now, you can deploy. That's a question we've got. So I don't think we're there quite yet, but we got excited when NPM compatibility was announced. So hopefully we'll keep moving in that direction. But there is the Fresh framework, which is available. Leo, could you actually please tell people just a quick summary of what Fresh is, and if they're looking for frameworks to deploy to Deno, that could be a good place to start.
Yeah, sure. Fresh is primarily SSR framework, which lets you give small islands of interoperability to pages. We use it for our website that I showed throughout the slides. And yeah, if you don't need massive amount of interactability on the page and don't need to do something like PWA or other really more client-side things, then I would say Fresh is perfect for that.
Oh, awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Leo. If there are any other questions, please feel free to reach out to Leo directly, put them in the chat, and we'll get them over to him as soon as we can. And next up, we have Charlie Cheever. Charlie, welcome. Charlie is the CEO and co-founder of Expo. Expo, excuse me. Expo is a company that makes tools and services that help developers build apps. And Charlie's going to be walking us through the state of building mobile apps with React Native in 2023. So Charlie, the floor is all yours.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Fun to be here. I'm going to share my screen a little bit, if that's okay. So if there's any questions along the way, I'm so happy to stop and answer questions and stuff. So feel free to interrupt me. So cool. I'm talking about building apps in 2023, the state of React Native. The reason I want to talk about that is that I feel like in the broader React community, there's a lot of people who've like heard of React Native and kind of know a little bit about it, but then a lot of people mostly stick to the world of the web and don't keep like close tabs on what's going on in the world of React Native. So I'm just going to run through a whole bunch of things that have kind of changed over the last couple of years that you might not know about, that might be interesting to you if you're sort of evaluating whether React Native is a good fit for something you're trying to do. And this story kind of starts back in like 2018 there was this blog post that came out from Airbnb talking about sunsetting React Native at that company. And for people who are like working closely in the React Native space, like me, a lot of people were sort of like, this isn't that big a deal. Like there's a bunch of organizational issues there that led to this happening. And like all these things that they had trouble with, they're actually getting better. So this is just sort of like a bump in the road. But I think for a lot of people outside of that, they saw this as like, oh, Airbnb was, a super excellent organization with tons of great technical people. And they really made a big commitment to this, and they just realized it doesn't work. And it really caused a lot of loss of faith of, React Native for a lot of people. And so kind of like, I wanted to sort of talk about everything that's kind of changed since then that makes it kind of worth taking another look at this technology and why it might be for you. One big thing, obviously, like I work on Expo, which is a company that basically helps people build stuff, especially with React Native. I think maybe the easiest way to explain like what we do is kind of like, if you're in the web space, Vercel does a lot of parallel things working on what, like they make this Next.js stuff and they make 20 other things that people use that kind of make it a lot easier to use React in production. And we kind of do the same thing for React Native, where we make, 100+ different things, and they all add up to making it like very usable to use React Native in production. And so like, here's a tweet from, I guess, a few hours ago on Twitter where somebody was sort of like, do you prefer Expo or React Native? That's not even the right way to think about it. You can use basically anything that we build with any React Native project. So there's no real choice you have to make anymore. But basically, like, I think people who are in the know are basically have circled around, like, you should use Expo all the time, unless you have really some super specific reason you wouldn't. And we've also seen that trend play out where like more than half of all new projects in the React Native space are using Expo, and that number is just trending up all the time. So again, what does that mean? Well, the first thing that like has changed a lot is this sort of idea about brownfield versus greenfield. And one of the big challenges that Airbnb had in their sort of deployment of React Native was that they had these large existing native apps that were like a whole bunch of stuff written in Objective-C and Swift on their iOS side, and a whole bunch of stuff written in Java on the Android side. And they had two big teams of sort of native iOS developers and Android developers. And sort of React Native was sort of originally built as sort of a library that you can insert into a native project and have some shared UI code that works across these different things. And they did that. And the problem with that is that then like they ended up kind of with this feeling that they needed to, like, all of the people on their team now needed to understand like multiple technologies. So they need to understand a lot about the native code that this stuff was embedded in, and have expertise in like Objective-C and Swift, but then also now have a expertise in like React Native JavaScript and all the APIs around that. And then also there's this other complexity of like interoperating between those two things. And so you can imagine, like, one problem I always point to when I talk about the challenges of brownfield apps is that if you think about like, just like a profile page in a sort of normal like CRUD social media type app, like maybe your LinkedIn profile or something like that. If you're building a website, the web browser runs entirely on JavaScript. And so you might have some code that like fetches a profile picture, fetches some biography information, fetches some other information, and that might do some smart caching and things like that. All that caching and all that stuff is always going to be done in JavaScript and stored in JavaScript variables, or maybe stored in local storage or something like that. But it's all going to be using the same stack and the same technology because that's what the browser is built on. But you can imagine a world where there's like, native code written in Objective-C or something like that, or Swift, and then JavaScript written for React Native. If you have one screen that has like a bunch of stuff being fetched in native code, using, iOS networking primitives and things like that, you're going to store, that image data, like the text data, other things that you're filling out that profile with, you're going to store that in sort of like native data structures. And then if you want to use that from your React Native code, you're going to have to kind of reach over into the land of native code and pull that out and have some sort of bridge between those. And that's just like one more thing to worry about. And vice versa, if you've pulled out things using fetch and other sort of normal JavaScript primitives in the world of React Native, but then you need it. And so you have your native code, you have to reach into the land of JavaScript and pull that data out there. And that's sort of its own complicated thing. And so that's like one of a bunch of examples of like the complexity moving between those things. So most React Native apps now don't live in this world of like kind of grafting React Native onto a totally like large and developed elaborate native app. They start where like the whole thing is React Native, but then you dip down into writing Objective-C, Kotlin, Swift, whatever, when you need to. Maybe the way to think about this is like, if you were going to write some piece of software on your desktop computer, you might use Node or you might use Deno. And then if you need to do something like cryptography or image processing, you might dip down into native, you might need to write some C++ code or use someone else's third-party C++ code. But you wouldn't like think a lot about how to graft your JavaScript with that native code. You'd sort of think, okay, everything is kind of running through JavaScript, and I'm going to take this one very focused piece, and I'm going to write that in C++, and I'm going to look up the standard for writing a node module, and I'm going to just like implement that. And that's kind of the way people work now, and it works pretty well. So the source of truth of almost everything tends to be in JavaScript, and very specific screens or APIs are written in native. Anyway, and because of that, one really popular way to get started is to use this thing called Expo Go. What Expo Go is you can kind of think of it as like a browser that helps you do development. And instead of being a web browser, it's just like a React Native browser. So you basically can like, download this app from the App Store, point it at a URL, and it'll load, JavaScript source code from that URL and any other assets from that URL, and then just sort of display them to you. And the really cool thing about that is it means you can get started in, a few seconds. I can actually show you like a really quick demo of that, just to give people the idea. Let me share my whole screen. Like if I just go and I can go to this, web editor that we have called Snack, and like then I can make a really simple project here. And if I just which just says like, hello, RedwoodJS developers, this is Expo Go. And then if I go over to my phone, if I just open the camera and then point it at this QR code over here, this QR code so I can get a full view of it. I can scan this, open Expo Go, and it'll just bring up the project and just say like, hello, RedwoodJS developers. And a really cool thing about this is like this, the development flow here is now basically like the web, and that I can change stuff really quickly. And if I just, as I change it, it's now updating in live on my screen. And so, except for downloading, the Expo Go app, which takes, a few seconds to download from the App Store, it's basically like the same speed as you can develop a website. Anyway, that's what Expo Go is. Just wanted to give people who didn't know that, like the background on that. And I'm going to go back to the slide deck. And anyway, so that lets people who are just like web developers start moving really, really fast. So we see a lot of people in the React Native space now not using any native stuff at all. We have a pretty big standard library that we built with Expo and built it into Expo Go. So you, in the same way that you can do, you might, if you were building an Electron app, most of the things that you need to do, you don't actually need to do anything beyond what the web browser offers by default. You can just use whatever's built in for, in many cases, 99% of the stuff you want to do. In some cases less. But like a lot of things you can just build, like you could have a web developer just build stuff using pure JavaScript, but get a really powerful native app. The other thing that like we've done that, I didn't say that, that's a big deal, is we built this thing called Expo config plugins, which makes the process of including native code into a React Native project way, way, way easier. Maybe the analogy that I was using before of how like if you wanted to add cryptography or image processing or something like very native to a Node.js project, you don't, in many cases, you don't actually like end up writing that code yourself or worrying about it. You just find one of these modules on npm and write npm install like sharp or something like that, and then it gets npm handles all that stuff where it downloads the right binary for your architecture on your machine and installs that, or it runs a C compiler for you, or does whatever it needs to do to build that and make it grafted onto your project in a healthy way. And now that used to be a pretty complicated process in React Native. Like if you look at a lot of React Native modules, they'll often have, you know, a 2 or 3 page long, you know, wiki entry that's sort of like, here's how you install this. Here's all the steps you have to do. You need to modify the app delegate on your iOS project. You need to modify the Android manifest XML plist, or not plist, but XML file on Android, and do these other, and there's all of these steps. And so we've made it so that like you can basically script all those steps as a library author and include them, so that as a library user, you can do something like just run this one command, like expo install expo camera, and then everything happens. And we've seen a lot of companies that make popular React Native modules. Like this is One Signal on the right, just their blog post announcing that the One Signal module now has an expo config plugin, and you can just basically run one command and then update one config file, and then bam, your One Signal module is working. So most of the popular React Native modules now can be installed with like, you know, one command that you know, a web developer can understand, even if they don't understand how to write Swift and Kotlin and those kind of things. It's just sort of in the same way that like, you know, Node.js developers can install all kinds of native code into their projects if somebody else wrote it and set it up properly. Then combining these two previous ideas that I just talked about, the new thing that we released like over the last 18 months or so is we call the Expo Dev Client, which is basically like the idea of combining that Expo Go kind of browser-like experience with this really easy ability to install any native code into a project like that. And so what an Expo Dev Client is basically sort of like building a version of your own Expo Go, but for your specific project. So if you needed some sort of like specialized camera module or some specialized video player or something that like would do something really fancy with Bluetooth or NFCs or something like that, or whatever native stuff that you need, even if it's just like writing the UI of one screen in native because you want the interactions to be, you know, totally perfect, and there's some sort of weird thing where they can only be written in Swift. You can add all that native code into your thing, but then get this browser that you can give to anyone on your team so that everybody can just write JavaScript and not work about it, not think about it, because all the native code that you need is built in there, and they're just working with that. Another really cool thing that makes this whole process easier is we have this cloud build service called EAS Build, so that like building one of these dev clients, or even building something for the App Store or for TestFlight, or you know, Google's beta service through Firebase, you can do all of that in the cloud. So you could be on a Windows computer, you could be on a Linux machine, you could be on a Mac that you didn't bother to install Xcode, or you just don't want to deal with Xcode. And you can just send off your code to us. We'll build it in the cloud for you. We have M1 and we're rolling out M2 machines really soon. And so that can actually be done pretty fast. And then we can actually send the binary right to your device, or right to the App Store or TestFlight, or wherever, the Play Store, wherever it needs to go, someone else's device, in fact. And so you can actually get one of these dev clients or one of these App Store things without having to even fumble around making sure you have, you know, one of these 8 GB, you know, Android Studio, Xcode, or both of them on your machine to build these things. We can just handle all that in the cloud for you. There's a free tier of that. So if you're just doing hobby projects or just mucking around, or you're like a nonprofit or something like that, you can just use the free tier. There's sometimes some queue times there, but you know, you're welcome to try this out for free. Just something that makes this whole process easier. Another thing that changed, I'm just kind of I'm just bouncing all over the place, giving you an overview of all the things that have changed and are updated. So some of this is going to not have great segues. But basically, like one thing that was part of the original design of React Native was that there was this idea of this asynchronous bridge. And the idea was that like you had a JavaScript thread and you had sort of the main thread, and they would only communicate asynchronously so that neither one would ever be blocked on each other. And there was something very elegant about that, and it enabled certain kinds of things. You could actually, you know, run your JavaScript like on your computer and then use the Chrome debugger like there. And there was something sort of cool about that. But in practice, forcing everything to be asynchronous all the time just meant that you couldn't get the performance you wanted in certain cases where you just really wanted to communicate really, really quickly between JavaScript and native. And so eventually the people working on sort of React Native Core realized that and wrote this thing called Turbo Modules, which basically allowed you to just sort of directly communicate between, you know, the land of native and the land of JavaScript using something they call JSI. And then more recently, we made this layer over that called Expo modules that lets you, in a very elegant way, write Swift, and just the ergonomics of making a module are much, much easier. And I think like you could, if you wanted to make a module that does something like allow you to edit the screen brightness or something like that, you'd be able to do that in only a few lines of code that look really intuitive. So like writing a native module is now actually very straightforward, and mostly just involves like looking up a couple of APIs that you need to do, or like understanding the native code, and not much else, because that's been very refined and it's also very performant now. So like the code that used to look like this on the left now looks sort of like this on the right, which is just sort of doesn't have a lot of cruft, is in modern languages, etc. Cool. And then another thing that happened is performance. One big thing here is people at Meta, Facebook were looking at a lot of low-end Android devices and on iOS devices and things like that, and finding like they just wanted faster TTI. They wanted like Facebook Marketplace to boot up faster, and that was really important. And this is also important to all kinds of apps. I mean, I know from working on consumer apps in the past that like every millisecond of startup time or load time and stuff is a huge deal. Meta made, at the time they were called Facebook, made this huge investment where they took a ton of smart people and built their own JavaScript engine called Hermes that is just optimized for doing basically like React Native and making it as interactive as quickly as possible. So it actually doesn't do jitting because you don't want to take the time up front to do the jitting. You just want to get it interactive as soon as possible. So everything about Hermes is designed to like make the page as interactive as possible, not do like long running, computationally intense things as fast as possible. But the difference that it makes is that mostly around something between 30 to 40% faster time to interactivity and stuff like that on most benchmarks that people have done. So this is now built into the default under Expo, and you can just use it in React Native. It's solid now, and it's generally what people use these days. And there's just this pretty big one-time boost in performance. But there's also, this is sort of the tip of the iceberg, where there's a whole bunch of work, including turbo modules, Expo modules, and other kinds of things, just to speed up making React Native and making the performance really, really good. The other really cool thing about Hermes is that you can actually use a debugger, which is a big problem with React Native for a while. If you actually used it a few years ago, you might have been frustrated by this, it was very hard to attach a real debugger to the actual JavaScript engine you're running. You would have to do weird things like run your JavaScript off device, which is an insane way to debug, but that's better now. Sort of in the realm of performance, but really specifically to like animations and gestures, there's been two really big leaps forward. One of them is called React Native Reanimated. This basically lets you do, write animations and gestures in a way that like they end up being very, very smooth and elegant, and the code that you write ends up being pretty reasonable. It looks like stuff like this. You just sort of say like width spring, and it animates the width and things like that. Really good library from these people in Poland called Software Mansion. It's Reanimated 2 is the current version. They made a bunch of improvements over Reanimated 1, and you can now do a lot of different things. And so I think one thing about, people used to sometimes say, oh, well, like if I want something to be really smooth or really slick, I need to do it in Swift or whatever. And there's not many things that you need to do that anymore. Furthering that, this React Native Skia is basically takes all the power of Skia and exposes it to React Native. So you can do all kinds of cool animations and stuff like that. I can just show like let me show this video here for like just a couple seconds, just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that you can do. All this stuff here in this intro was basically made with React Native Skia. So like if you want to do crazy animations like this, where there's all kinds of color gradients, all kinds of zooming in, zooming out, things moving around, et cetera, that's all possible. And like you just have to learn how to use the Skia API. But it's built into Expo Go even, and it's really easy to install the library. So cool stuff like this is now just like accessible at your fingertips. This guy, William Candelon, makes a bunch of really cool videos like, can it be done in React Native? And he and this guy, Christian, basically spent a bunch of time building this library, and then now it's sponsored by Shopify. So continued investment in this, it's going to continue to get better. And it can basically do everything that you want to do in that realm. Another thing that's kind of moved forward is web support on React Native has gotten a lot better. We're now starting to see people basically build, instead of building sort of like taking a React team and having one group of it go off and build their iOS and Android apps using React Native, and then another group go build their website using just React and Remix or Next.js or whatever. We're seeing a lot of people start to use one code base to do iOS, Android, and web. My favorite example of this is called beatgig.com. The team there does a really, really slick job of making this all work from a single code base. Their app feels really good, and their website feels really good. I think I brought this up, but like they have a lot of cool animations and things like that, and it's just like their website's really solid, but also their iOS app is really solid, and it's all the same code base, which is really cool. The best practice in that space right now is basically like combining Next.js with Expo. And so that way you get all these things like SSR and SEO optimization and things like that, along with being able to target iOS and Android. So I'd say that's like 80% of the way there. There's still some work to make that a totally smooth experience. And if you were just building a website, I probably wouldn't tell you to build it this way if you didn't have experience doing it. But I think it's going to get there over the next year, to the point where it's like there's no real reason not to build stuff this way, because that keeps open the option to target iOS, Android, and web, and you're not really giving up anything compared to building a React website in another way. And then part of this is Evan Bacon, who's probably a lot of you see on Twitter, has built this thing called Expo Router, which basically brings sort of routing across iOS, Android, and web to this sort of up to modern standards, where a lot of cool routers that people have built recently are doing things like file-based routing and things like that, where you just sort of harkening back to like when people used to build like PHP websites, where you just sort of make a file in a directory and then you can kind of guess what the URL is and it just works. A lot of things with Expo Router just work out of the box and it's super easy. And also Expo Router solves all these problems of like, hey, like in my app, I want to have like a tab bar and go between these screens in this way, but in my website, there's the browser's URL bar. Like, how do I map that to this thing? And just sort of solving all those problems using best practices and like thinking about how people have solved this in the past. That's all built into Expo Router. So you can build new apps out of the box and have them feel right across all these different platforms in just a matter of minutes, where you don't have to solve these problems. Like Evan basically thought through all these problems and implemented in this library. So this is turning out to be really, really, really good. It's still like not completely done yet, but this is the horse I would ride on if I was building a new app. Evan's doing a really good job with it, and it's solving all these problems and making stuff faster. Anyway, that's sort of like quick overview of basically everything that's, not everything, but like a lot of stuff that's gone on in the last couple of years that makes React Native a lot more usable. Just sort of like, there's not really much reason not to build something in React Native these days, unless you really know that maybe you're making a 3D game or something. You might want to use Unity or something like that. But if you're making something that like feels like a normal app, I think there's not much downside. One other thing that some people ask me to talk about is comparing Flutter with React Native. Flutter's also gotten pretty good over the last couple of years. The biggest difference is that like React Native, you're actually using like the native iOS and Android views. This ends up being a bigger deal on iOS, where I think that Apple has done a little bit nicer of a job with iOS than Android has had happen. But like, I think that if you build a React Native app today, it really does feel like basically the same as like an app written in like Swift UI or something like that for the most part. And that's most of the time I find that not true on iOS with Flutter. But the nice thing about Flutter is that it's kind of in the same way that like the web browser, like if you build something in Chrome, it works the same on Linux, it works the same on Windows, it works the same on Mac. You don't really have to think about it because the web browser is rendering every pixel. Flutter works that way, where instead of delegating to the like actual native layer, it just sort of handles the entire rendering process. And so you get a lot of consistency across devices and things like that. So there's something simplifying about that. And they put a lot of work into it, and it's pretty reasonable as well. But overall, I think it's just the big takeaway is just like it's pretty reasonable to write a cross-platform thing these days. And like unless you really have some specific need, it doesn't often make sense to do something in like two projects where you're writing native iOS stuff and native Android stuff, because stuff's gotten a lot better. Anyway, obviously biased because I work on this stuff, and take it all with a grain of salt, but I work on it because I think it's important, and I think we're doing a pretty good job with most of these things. So thanks for listening to me, and I can take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlie. Does anybody have questions? That was a lot to take in, and I know there's a lot of things I want to start playing with personally, but appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Plenty of questions. Charlie, let me ask one for you from chat, which was effectively, I think you answered it implicitly, but so it sounds like, to confirm, you no longer have to eject if you want to use native libraries.
Yeah, there's not even, we kind of have even sort of jettisoned that concept, and we've really worked hard to make it so that like you can be using any kind of React Native project, install any Expo libraries, and any Expo project, you can kind of at any time just start installing stuff and it'll just work. And so like you don't have to make this fork in the road choice where it's sort of like, oh, I have all this stuff that's nice and easy and convenient, but if I want to use one native library, I have to give it all up and manage all that stuff myself. We have this process called like pre-build, where basically we'll sort of like constantly regenerate your iOS and Android directories and all the native stuff as necessary. If you, and can like, even as you add native libraries, that process can still be managed and sort of handled for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. That came across, but yeah, I want to make sure I got to that. If there's any other questions in the YouTube chat, we'll get that too. We barely have time to answer like all my questions, but let me try this one. If you want to do multi-client, right, plus API plus backend, right? So backend features within a mono repo and using Expo. I think one of the ways we've approached thinking about that, which we'd like to do with Redwood, we're not native mobile experts, although we have people on the core team who know some things, but we kind of like, what are the requirements that we would want if we're doing full stack, right? And we've really covered a broad surface area of features out of the box. So that I think it can be a little intimidating, like, oh, to support mobile, we're going to have to do ... auth and router and deployment and testing. Those are all the things we'll want if we're going to do local dev. Sounds like you've solved a lot of those. Maybe a better way to ask a question, just see what comes to your mind, is what's the main friction point from going from, okay, I got my backend set up and now I want to connect that, integrate it with the mobile app. And is there now a primary point of friction between taking that step to getting that working at a local dev? Maybe it's just a whole host of things.
Yeah, I think not really. I think it's fairly similar to the friction point you'd find if you sort of said, hey, I have my backend set up. Now I'm setting up a new web front end using any one of the frameworks out there. Like, how do you connect a thing you made with Create React App, or you made with Remix, or you made like all these things. Some of them have more opinions or less about how to connect to a backend. I think Redwood seems to be more full stack, and some of these things are more like just a client, and then you have to bring your own connection to this stuff. Right now, the Expo isn't super opinionated about connecting your backend. It basically just says, hey, here's a bunch of primitives like fetch and whatnot. Use them as you want. Use libraries that you want, and so there's no real, but like most of the stuff, a lot of the stuff we've done has basically been work to make it so that people who have like no JavaScript and have web development expertise don't have to deal with a bunch of native stuff or other weird hard stuff. They can just start doing stuff the way they would on the web for the most part, but be doing it in the world of native.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, we're just excited to explore more because I think there's a lot we'd like to do there, and that same vision for being able to like do multi-client where you don't have to worry about config, right? Like I'm not spending all my time. I just want to do that. I'm not spending all my time just having to get things working together and talking, and the integration and the tools I need. Yeah. Right. Because development isn't just adding a few lines of code. It's also then the CI/CD process, right? That's the approach we've been taking, and I'm just excited for us to get to dig into Expo and see where that can fit that integration piece.
Yeah. We'd love to chat more, just how we can integrate better with Redwood and make it work really well out of the box. Yeah, that'd be fun. That was a great presentation. I'm glad you just kind of did the overview, because it helped me to know. And the dev experience for the stack that Expo Go was fire. That was awesome to see. Cool. Yeah. Really appreciate the time to talk to all you. Yeah, thank you. I'll be quiet if there's any other questions, but Charlie, thank you. Look forward to more. And Leo, thank you. I look forward to more. Amanda, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Doesn't look like we have too many more questions. I think you all covered your topics well and left people excited for more. I want to say special thank you to both Leo and Charlie for being here today. We are going to start hosting these once a month. Next month, it'll be on March 9th. So hopefully we'll see you all at that one. And thank you all for being here. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.